Without further ado, let me turn to the program at hand tonight. We're pleased, honored, to have Lieutenant Colonel Wayne Smith, WV2ONZ, who's going to be talking to us about a topic that I think for many of us, we've got some familiarity with that goes back if you've been a ham a long time. But if you're like me, I think probably your knowledge has sort of fallen away just as you've gotten into other things and your interests have gone in different directions. But the Civil Air Patrol remains a vital part of our defense system. I won't steal Wayne's thunder here. And obviously, it's obviously an important part of our defense. And actually, yeah, it has a very good crossover with amateur radio, as I think we'll learn tonight. Wayne is a graduate of the Civil Air Patrol National Staff College and is also Deputy Commander and Communications Officer for the Long Island Group. He manages a volunteer team supporting air and ground-based VHF and HF radio communications, supporting the Civil Air Patrol missions, including emergency services, air search and rescue, homeland security, and cadet programs. He has more than 11 years of experience in the role. Wayne's been an active ham since the 70s. He's got an advanced class license, WB2ONZ, and enjoys digital communications modes and mobile operating, including mobile HF. And he's a member of our colleagues over on Long Island, the Great South Bay Amateur Radio Club. Without further ado, Wayne, let me turn the program over to you. We're honored to have you, Lieutenant Colonel Wayne Smith, WB2ONZ.
Wayne, thank you, Ed. Really appreciate it. Very happy to be here tonight. Let me share my screen and we'll get started. So today I'm going to be speaking about the history, the mission, and the technology that we use in Civil Air Patrol for radio communications. I'll also be covering some additional topics. I have a really great agenda for everyone. In addition to those topics that I just mentioned, I'm also going to be talking about the career of communications officer as well as other job roles in communications for Civil Air Patrol. I'll talk about our emergency services communications teams and what they do. And then I'll get into some of the activities that take place at Long Island Group related to communications and some of the recent local missions that we've performed where communications has been a vital part of those activities. Some of those activities also involve joint CAP and amateur radio operations, and I'll show you a couple of examples of that. So first, let's talk about the history of Civil Air Patrol. As Ed mentioned, we've been around a long time. We actually got started at the beginning of World War II, providing many different coastal patrol and homeland security missions, as well as search and rescue, air defense, and even forest fire spotting. A lot of activities that supported the military on the home front. And in 1946, we were actually incorporated as a nonprofit public corporation by Public Law 476. And we became the official auxiliary of the United States Air Force in 1948. And many of the missions that we performed in World War II, including Homeland Security, search and rescue, emergency transporter personnel, and flight training, we still perform today. For the efforts of our members in World War II, Congress actually awarded the Civil Air Patrol a gold medal, Congressional Gold Medal, which you see here. And just to give you a little more background on our role and relationship to the Air Force, we operate in two different modes. First, we would operate independently of the Air Force as a federally chartered corporation under Title 36 of the US Code. And that would be when we're performing local community service and aerospace education activities, including our cadet program. When we operate under Title 10, that is when we're operating in the capacity as the official civilian auxiliary of the United States Air Force. And in both cases, volunteers support our activities. So under our Congressional Charter, as a public nonprofit corporation and auxiliary of the Air Force, today we perform these major missions. Emergency services, very, very active today in supporting the response to COVID, but also many other activities related to disaster relief and homeland security. We have a very, very active cadet program that teaches aerospace education, leadership, character development, and fosters the physical fitness of our young adults. And then we also have an aerospace education program that supports schools across the country and provides educators with a lot of materials to support their aerospace education activities locally. So that's our external aerospace education program, in addition to the aerospace education that we provide for our cadets. Okay, let's talk about the mission capabilities and organizational resources of Civil Air Patrol. Our area of responsibility actually includes the continental United States, Alaska, Hawaii, Puerto Rico, and the Virgin Islands. We fly 60 to 80% of the 1st Air Force daily air sorties every day. And 90% of all of the inland search and rescue missions in the continental United States are actually flown by the Civil Air Patrol as tasked by the Air Force Rescue Coordination Center. Each of those missions that we fly is reviewed and approved or signed by active duty or reserve Air Force commanders. So we're tightly integrated with the Air Force when we operate under the role of the Air Force Auxiliary. From a personnel standpoint, we have over 23,000 network operators, communicators, and as you can see, a very, very large number of aircrew, not only pilots, but also observers and scanners. We have a very large ground emergency services component as well, with over 4,000 emergency trained ground team members that work in conjunction with our air crews to support search and rescue as well as disaster relief activities. All of the personnel that work in these emergency services roles come to us with different life experience and skills, but we have very, very active training programs so that if they want to perform a particular job, like being an aircrew member or communicator, we'll train them. Here's an example of the types of aircraft that the Civil Air Patrol flies today. We actually have the largest fleet of Cessna aircraft in the world, owned and operated by the Civil Air Patrol under the auspices of the Air Force. All the aircraft have been modernized with what we call glass cockpits, with the Civil Air Patrol aircraft on the Long Island Group flight line at ISA MacArthur Airport. At any given time, we'll have between 1 and 3 aircraft of different types. Some of our aircraft have special sensors, as I just mentioned, such as the Cessna 182 and 206. You might be able to see on the bottom of these aircraft is actually a sensor dome that enables us to do telephoto or telescopic live video, as well as even infrared for spotting different targets in a variety of homeland security and emergency services missions. So this is a really interesting diagram that talks to how we're saving the taxpayer money and why the Air Force really likes leveraging our aircraft and our assets and our people skills, our people assets. If you look at the right side of this chart, you can see that to operate a typical C-130 cargo and search aircraft costs about $10,000 an hour. To operate a Black Hawk type helicopter in the neighborhood of $7,700 an hour, almost $700 an hour to operate a drone, and for a Civil Air Patrol aircraft, typically in the range of about $165 an hour. So we can not only deploy many, many aircraft to meet a regional disaster scenario, but we can also do it a lot less expensively than if the Air Force had to fly one of their typical types of aircraft. Now, every aircraft has unique capabilities. So the Civil Air Patrol's main advantage with our aircraft is that we can fly low and slow, and that's ideal for aerial photography. So aerial photo reconnaissance is one of the key missions and one of the key skills of our air crew members. We actually have an airborne photographer job role, which might interest people that have skills not only in photography, but also like to fly. And here you can see some examples of the different scenarios that we operate in when we're doing aerial photo reconnaissance, such as disaster relief, homeland security, search and rescue. And if you look at this picture on the bottom left, you'll see that we also have radio direction finding equipment, and personnel are trained to work with our air crews, and the aircraft also have radio direction finding equipment. So if an aircraft should go down in a wilderness area, like you see in the top left photo, if people are lost in a wilderness situation, or even in a maritime scenario, the emergency position indicating beacons on vessels will go off, and the Civil Air Patrol aircraft can hone in on those beacons, whether they're an electronic locator transmitter in an aircraft, a personal locator beacon carried by a hiker, or the marine emergency beacon. And once the aircraft narrows down the area where that beacon is, a ground team will get into action, or multiple ground teams coordinating with the aircraft, and will get right into the scene and locate the missing and possibly injured people on the ground. We also do cell phone forensics, and have had great success with that program to complement the DFing that we do on radio, where we can zero in on the location of a missing aircraft based on cell phone transmissions, as well as radar tracks. We also get involved with air defense exercises in conjunction with not only the Air Force, but other homeland security assets. And many times we serve in the role of a simulated target aircraft that might be violating airspace, whether unintentionally or intentionally, to train the Air Force pilots on how to intercept those aircraft and escort them to the nearest airport. We're also involved in aerial reconnaissance, not surveillance of specific individuals. We don't get involved in law enforcement activities directly, but we do general area reconnaissance activities in support of counter-drug efforts nationwide. Another activity that we engage in is low-level route and range surveys for the military. Again, taking advantage of aerial photography skills of our team. And other types of aerial and ground-based patrol activities, including the ones that you see here. The remote piloted aircraft escorts, we were doing that for, I guess, about 4 years up in the Schenectady, New York area, where there was some very active training activities going on with Air Force drones. And they needed us to help escort those drones in and out of a civilian airport where they were operating en route to their military training areas. So that was a very interesting mission that New York Wing was performing for the Air Force. Our cadet program is very, very active, including cadet flight training, physical training, educational training, leadership training. The cadets actually play an active role in the emergency services response that we perform as members of not only the ground search and rescue teams, but also working in the communication centers, doing emergency communications and supporting mission-based activities. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, We have a very large external aerospace education program supporting different types of aviation learning, both for our cadets as well as for schools across the country. We support major aviation events like the Oshkosh Air Show and educational activities that take place there with about 500,000 people, where CAP provides flight line and flight marshaling support. And this is just a little bit more about our aerospace education. We have an aerospace connections and education program supporting elementary school children nationwide. There are national cadet activities that are sponsored by the Air Force, with more than 30 different activities taking place across the country on an annual basis. A lot of those enable the cadets to go flying on Air Force aircraft and to take part in career orientation training on the different job specialties in the Air Force. Okay, so let's talk about Civil Air Patrol communications now, which is why you're all here. So today, Civil Air Patrol operates both HF and VHF nets on a daily basis across the United States and in our remote locations. There are several different types of nets that we operate, which you see here. Those include emergency disaster response support, command and control of both aircraft and ground teams on other types of missions like air search and rescue, our scheduled traffic nets to support the operations of the organization, and many, many different types of training nets at all levels. There's also ad hoc communications that's taking place on an ongoing basis that supports daily operations and the logistics of CAP. We are using frequencies that are allocated to us by the Air Force and also administrated by the National Telecommunications and Information Agency, NTIA. So we're not under the auspices of the FCC. We are, as a government agency or public nonprofit corporation, an auxiliary of the Air Force. All of our technology standards and frequencies are under the auspices of NTIA. The Civil Air Patrol also has a very large network of VHF repeaters on multiple frequencies across the country. And in fact, one of those repeaters is based in New York City, another one is in Long Island, and there are multiple repeaters in New Jersey as well as across the region. It's an example of the types of communications that take place in the Civil Air Patrol communication system to support our operations and some of the interoperability that we have as well. We have radios, VHF and HF, in all of our fleet of ground vehicles. We have portable radios that our ground search and rescue teams use, as well as to support other types of activities, such as flight line operations or at special events. Our aircraft, as I mentioned, have VHF capability as well as DF capability, and then we'll talk to other agencies on different occasions because our radios also support different government interoperability channels as well as the marine radio FM channels. We operate FM analog, P25, as well as encrypted modes for digital. And we'll show you some of the equipment that we use in just a minute. Very large number of resources in operation across the United States, as you can see here. We have more than 500 Motorola repeaters in operation for both analog and P25. We also have transportable repeaters in a suitcase, as well as airborne repeaters that are integrated into our aircraft, which will hover over or orbit a particular operational area, such as in an emergency situation, and support not only ground operations, but communications with distant mission bases that are directing the activities of our aircraft and ground teams. Very interesting activity. I've actually worked in that role of what we call a hybrid. A CAP hybrid is an airborne repeater and will orbit maybe at 10,000 feet for a couple of hours, with the repeater range being out to maybe 80 or 90 or 100 miles. It's, of course, based on line of sight, and the higher you are, the further you're going to go. Our HF operations today largely are supported by the MICOM radios that you see here. So there's a MICOM 3 radio pictured here. Those are installed not only in base stations, but sometimes in vehicles. They support conventional single sideband as well as A.L.E communications, and I'll talk more about that. So A.L.E, I don't know if anybody has ever had any experience with A.L.E. We use it extensively. It stands for Automatic Link Establishment. And this capability enables you to basically do two things. It lets you automatically determine through sounding signals that are sent out on multiple frequencies that are pre-programmed into the radio, what would be the strongest connection, what would be the best frequency to use to establish communications between two or more stations. And it also allows you to send short text messages, either attended or unattended, between one or multiple radios. So the advantages of A.L.E is that you can not only pick the best frequency to establish communications and send text messages, but also the operator doesn't even have to get involved. It can be totally automated process of connecting, as well as paging a particular station by their call sign, and then of course being able to see messages that have been sent to you that are stored in the memory of the radio. This is a look at what the current standard radio is for CAP HF communications, MICOM 3. And then here we have CAP aircraft radios. Today there are two main types of VHF FM radios that we use. One supports P25 as well, which is the one on the bottom. These are in addition to the aircraft radios that the pilots use to talk to air traffic control. So we're using our dedicated Civil Air Patrol VHF frequencies. Typically when we're in the air, we'll talk on simplex, not through the repeaters, because the aircraft will trigger multiple repeaters, as you can imagine, if they're flying at high altitude. Our repeaters do have PL, and frequency coordination helps to limit any kind of potential interference between repeaters that are in adjacent regions. But usually when we're airborne, we're operating simplex, or we have a hybrid, and we're operating as an airborne repeater ourselves on that aircraft. This is an example of a DF receiver on a CAP aircraft. They operate on several different frequencies that the emergency locator transmitters, personal locator beacons, and the EPIRBs for marine use operate on. That would be the 121.5 frequency, which is the most common frequency for ELTs that are used on aircraft. 121.775 is our training frequency, which we use separately. There's also a 220 megahertz frequency that is used by the military, and then a 400 megahertz frequency for the newer ELTs. This unit will pick up multiple ones. And what's interesting about the 400 megahertz ELTs is that they send a data burst once per minute. And these units will actually let you capture a bearing on that data burst and then maintain that bearing on the display so that you can direct the pilot towards that location. And then the 121 megahertz frequency is a continuous broadcast, but of shorter range. So once you get close in, you can actually switch over to that frequency And that's also what the ground teams do their DFing on. And the single ELT or personal locator beacon will work on both frequencies. They'll do the burst on the 400 megahertz, and they'll do the continuous broadcast on the 121 megahertz. Okay, before I go any further, are there any questions on either CAP mission or current communication capability?
Yeah, Wayne, I have a question. Gordon Beatty, W2TTT. I know from shares and other programs I'm involved in, the MICOM 3s are reaching end of life. So what's the plan for replacing those?
We have a very, very strong plan that's already underway, which I'm going to talk about in the next section. So good segue.
Okay, good enough.
Any other questions?
A question about frequencies.
Sure.
Here, the frequencies that you use for HF, are they the same as the Mars frequencies that we know about, or is there something special for Civil Air Patrol?
They are special frequencies allocated specifically for Civil Air Patrol operation. They're different from the Mars frequencies, and they cover the full HF radio spectrum from 2 megahertz all the way up to in the range of about 26 megahertz. So outside of the Mars channels, but the same sort of concept of, multiple bands depending on propagation.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, let's keep going. So this section talks about the communications capability enhancements that are planned and also underway, and there's a lot going on. So the first update is that we're getting all new VHF land mobile radios, Motorola APX 4500, mobile and base station radios, which you see here on the left, and the APX 4000 handheld radios, which you see on the right. Those will complement the radios that we use today from E.F. Johnson that have been in use for quite some time. These are already being deployed nationwide with lots of additional capability. Here's an example of a CAP vehicle with the new APX 4500 installed on the left in a console. On the right side, you see our older radio equipment, including the E.F. Johnson 5317, which is in the middle of that console, as well as the MICOM 3T radio, which is just a version of the MICOM with a control head. The handheld radios are going to be deployed as a set of 6 radios in a rugged case with multiple batteries with a rack charger, and they'll be intended for use by a ground emergency services team in a response type mission. We also have new HF capabilities, as I just mentioned, which was what you asked about. So there are 2 new HF radios that are being deployed, the Barrett 4050 and the Codan Sentry. Both of these radios will support secure digital voice capability and integrate what's known as the Rapid M modem for encrypted digital communications. And they will also support A.L.E, but generation 2 A.L.E. And these are both NTIA compliant as well as JITC compliant, which is a military standard. Here's an example of the Barrett HF radio. Really nice color display, very compact, and a lot of additional capability, as I just mentioned. And here's an example of the Codan communications radios with a remote control head and a ruggedized RF deck. Okay, some of the additional major initiatives that are taking place right now. One of those is called ReadyOp. ReadyOp is in support of our Homeland Security and Emergency Services mission, and it combines radio communications with internet-based connectivity, and it's support for widely dispersed CAP assets that might be responding to a mission, such as multiple ground teams operating in the disaster area, directed by incident commander and other branch directors that would be potentially in a remote location. So the ICS, the incident command system, is something that Civil Air Patrol uses for all of our emergency response and homeland security missions. This is developed by FEMA and used by many, many different types of agencies at all levels to coordinate the planning and response to disaster type operations. And the ReadyOp software that was developed for this purpose is tied into the ICS concept and provides capabilities in all the areas that you see here. But it's a lot more than that. In addition to software, we are deploying ReadyOp radio over IP gateways that will enable a remote operator, such as an incident commander or air or ground branch director, to access a CAP repeater in an operational response area via a secure internet connection. They'll access the repeater via a desktop or portable PC or even a smartphone device, and then connect to a radio over IP gateway that's in the vicinity of a local CAP repeater, which in turn will be used to communicate through radio with either aircraft or ground teams. So that's the ReadyOp concept. This is what the ReadyOp gateway stations look like. They're being deployed now all over the country to work in conjunction with our repeater network. Related to ReadyOp, we have another initiative called CapGuard. And the concept behind CapGuard is similar in that it's remote internet-based secure access to our radio communications capabilities in an operational area. The difference is that here, the ReadyOp gateway station would be used to communicate directly with the CAP aircraft on our CapGuard frequency. This is simplex FM frequency. So no repeater, just ground stations talking to aircraft remotely accessed by operators such as incident commanders as needed from other locations. So that's CapGuard. We also have a new initiative called CapDirect, which stands for Digital Record Traffic System. This is designed to support additional missions that require secure communications, both voice and data, including missions such as the Continental Airborne Reconnaissance for Damage Assessment, or CARDA mission, as well as state and regional disaster airlift missions, or what is known as SARDA missions, in support of both national as well as regional and statewide mission requirements. So these are, again, things like aerial reconnaissance, damage assessment, even transport of key personnel such as FEMA personnel that might be responding to a disaster. So the CapDirect system is to support the command and control of assets during those missions, and more importantly, sending and receiving of secure messages, either via voice or digital data on both HF and VHF radios. To enable this, we are deploying the MIL standard 188-110B waveform for secure data communications, which today is used by other groups such as the Mars system, as well as the State Guard. And those modems are going to be integrated with our current equipment, the MICOM 3 radios, as well as the next generation HF radios that you just saw. And they will also be integrated with our VHF gear, our current EF Johnson radios, and the new Motorola radios. So this is secure digital voice and data communication. As part of a CapDirect deployment, there will be a dedicated data terminal consisting of a dedicated laptop computer whose configuration is locked down, and part of that includes having it be air gapped from the internet so that these resources are completely immune from any sort of software security issues, internet security activities. There'll be custom software that comes with these, and also a dedicated printer. Another major initiative that we have is called AeroNet, which stands for Airborne Extensive Relay Over the Horizon Network. You're going to love this one. So AeroNet system is a really cutting edge system that is currently being piloted. It's including fault tolerant enhanced mesh networking technology, and it will be supporting secure voice, data, and also video and position reporting over not only VHF radio, but also SATCOM and Wi-Fi based networks. And this is designed to connect operation centers with both aircraft and surface assets such as ground teams. The AeroNet system includes packages that are configured to support those three types of user groups: the operation centers for command and control, what we call C2 nodes, the air, as well as the surface assets. So you can see, for example, that for aircraft, there would be one airborne voice and data radio, a SATCOM terminal, and 2 tablets with software that lets them share those radio communications connections. We also have planned for the surface assets handheld radios that support the same type of communications, and even automated position tracking antennas that will track an aircraft. So really high-tech stuff. Any questions on our future and actually current initiatives for deploying new technology?
This question is related to that, but in the bigger picture, I may have missed it. But who pays for all this? Are you part of the budget of the Air Force, or is there another?
We are part of the budget of the Air Force. They provide a significant amount of our funding. Additional funding comes from donors, both corporate and individual, and member dues. But the member dues are the smallest part of our funding. It's primarily funded through the government, through congressional appropriations.
I live a couple of miles from the Schenectady County Airport that you referred to, which is the home of the Air National Guard 109th Airlift Wing. And my son was a CAP member there, but back in the 90s, before all this high-tech stuff was underway.
That's great. Should get back into it again if he has time. We could definitely use someone trained in, paramedic, emergency services. But yes, we were very active working with the Air National Guard. We continue to be active working with the Air National Guard, as well as the State Guard, the State Emergency Management Office, and many other state agencies. Okay, so how do we get involved in all this? What are the typical job roles of CAP communicators, and what's the career track? So we do have a very robust professional development program that supports different technical ratings for communicators. Actually, all of our emergency services job specialties have training milestones that we term technician, senior, and master ratings. Those ratings are attained through a combination of self-paced, web-based training, as well as live instructor-led training, much of which is now remote, as you can imagine, due to COVID. But when we get past all of this, we also have a large number of regional, national, and local training activities and specialized emergency services training academies, which include communications officer training, as well as having ongoing communications meetings at the level of each team. These are the different job roles that are available from the top down. We have our national communications staff, directors of communications that do strategic planning and management at the state and regional level, and the teams that work with them at the state and regional level. We have communications officers that, again, are responsible for planning, management, and training at the local level. So our groups roughly correspond to a county level activity. And then we have squadrons that are at roughly the community level. At all of those levels, squadron, group, wing, which is statewide, regional, and national, have these different types of job roles. Communications unit leader and mission radio operator are specific to emergency services activities, and these job roles overlap the other ratings that you may have as a communications officer. The communications officer job is your full-time job in Civil Air Patrol when there's not a mission taking place, doing things like training, equipment acquisition, setting up and managing antenna infrastructure, repeater infrastructure, creating communications plans, and so on. And then when there's an actual mission, whether it's a real mission or a training activity, the communications team has these additional job roles of communications unit leader, which is the individual that would work with the incident commander and staff to create a communications plan, interface with other agencies for joint communications, supervise the operations of a communications team in a radio room or remote site, and more. Our mission radio operators are typically our net control station operators for tactical nets during an emergency. We also have the net control station operators that operate the training nets and administrative nets on a daily basis. Some specialized job roles are communications engineer for maintaining equipment, doing custom configurations and antenna implementation and maintenance, as well as supporting the repeater infrastructure and specialized gear such as ReadyOp. We have communications training officers, as well as communications licensing officers. So lots of different job roles at all different levels. Any questions on that section?
Yeah, this is Charlie Cibula, AC2ZU. How are you connected up with the universities and the colleges to recruit?
Each individual unit that would be located in the proximity of a college or even high school, because our cadets are high school age, could potentially do outreach. Our aerospace education team, especially the external aerospace education team, our public affairs officers and our recruiting officers would probably also be doing outreach to maybe do presentations like this at the level of a local, university, or for a particular class that's offered at that university.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about it. I'm an adjunct instructor at a community college in Toms River, New Jersey. And I'm just wondering, I mean, I don't know if you guys come to the campuses, do any of these presentations, get the students interested in this particular area. Most of the students that I'm talking about are engineering majors in they have an associate degree in engineering, okay? They're not going to have their bachelor's, but I'm just wondering whether this would be an opportunity to reach out to community colleges.
We would love to extend our outreach to any organizations and any groups that are interested in our mission and want to support our mission and want to learn about new technology and take part in CAP communications. So if you'd like to try to set up some sort of special activity, we'd be happy to do that. My colleague from New Jersey is on here. He might want to reach out to you after this presentation, and maybe you guys can set something up.
That makes good sense. If you can have him link up with me, and we can figure out if there's an opportunity.
Okay, so at the end, why don't you stay on, and maybe we can exchange email addresses, and you can try to get something going.
Absolutely, thank you.
Wayne, this is at WX2R. I guess in terms of looking at the positions, are these commitments or enlistments per se? I mean, how would you define them?
Well, the Civil Air Patrol is a volunteer organization. So that means that anything you do for Civil Air Patrol is on a volunteer basis. When you join the organization, you would work with a professional development officer who would set up your initial training, onboarding training. And then once you go through that initial training on things like the mission and history of Civil Air Patrol, our organizational structure, military customs and courtesies, of course, because we are an auxiliary of the Air Force, all that basic training is done locally and at local unit meetings. Once you get through that, the professional development officers and your mentors would work with you to identify the areas that interest you most to be able to focus on as a career development specialty, such as communications. Now, you don't have to have communications experience to become a CAP communicator. We'll train you, but historically, many CAP communicators are amateur radio operators because they have the interest and the skills. So it's an ideal combination. And in fact, CAP, up until I'm going to say maybe 20 years ago, used amateur radio equipment before we were under the auspices of the NTIA for equipment standards. And then we switched over to using mil-spec and commercial spec equipment. But the amateur radio heritage is strong, and we would certainly be very happy to have any hams that are interested in joining to bring their skills to the organization. But that's not required. You know, if somebody's interested in learning about comms, we definitely would love to take them through the program. So I hope that answered your question. Okay, let's keep going. Sure, let's keep going here. We'll have more Q&A at the end. This section is about our emergency services communications teams, and there's some photos of those teams in action as well. This is an example of our cadets getting involved in emergency services missions and training activities. So they work alongside of what are called senior members, which are the adult members of Civil Air Patrol. That is a unique aspect of our program, that the cadets do learn leadership skills and technical skills by working in an actual mission response capacity. Here are the mission related specialties again, which we were just discussing before. There are a couple of additional ones here. Beyond just the communications unit leader and mission radio operators who we just talked about, we have a need for mission staff assistants. And the mission staff assistants role is to support the communications team, doing message logging, manning the phones or internet email communications, which also support some of our activities, as well as delivering messages to other mission-based personnel. They also typically will help out with issuing out equipment to our ground teams and our air crews during the course of a mission. And on those air crews and ground teams, we always will have radio operators that do the on-point communications back to mission base that actually perform the mission. We have initial communications user training for the air crews, the mission observers, and the ground team radio operators that will be operating the radios in the field and talking back to the mission radio operators at the base. This is an example of the typical mission-based staffing when we have an actual or training exercise. We will have teams of a radio operator and a logging specialist that will do the logging on our internet-based mission management software, as well as in a paper logbook as a backup. So we'll have teams of 2 in each position: VHF, which we typically use for air-to-ground communications, aircraft to the base, ground teams to mission base, which is typically through the repeaters. So there'll be another team there. We'll have an operator working the HF radio, which is typically used to coordinate between multiple mission bases or staging areas in a regional or even larger scale mission activity. We'll typically have training exercises that are at the statewide level or even the regional level, such as the entire Northeast. And we use HF communications to coordinate that between bases. And then, as I mentioned, we'll have telephone and email communications, mission staff assistants, and usually 2 communications unit leaders that can alternate and back each other up. We might also have trainees in each of these roles for on-the-job training, skills evaluators, which is another role in Civil Air Patrol. And then on certain training activities, there would be U.S. Air Force active duty or reserve liaison officers that would be operating in either a evaluation capacity or as a supervisor or mentor to the activity. Our typical setup of equipment for a mission response would be at a base, at a mission base, typically 2 or more VHF FM radios, 1 HF radio, approximately 2 to 10 VHF and UHF handhelds. We have UHF handheld radios as well. Mission laptop computers to do the logging and administration supporting the activity. We of course use the A.L.E. text messaging to send short messages back and forth between bases, and we also rely on other tools as well for electronic communication. Here's a section that will talk about the recent activities that Long Island Group is engaged in related to communications and some of our local capabilities and infrastructure. So this is Long Island Group's Communications Center at MacArthur Airport, at least one part of it. This is on a dedicated compound, a dedicated base, full-time base that we have at that airport. We have not only the communications center, but the flight line that you saw earlier, a motor pool area, and then several training and operational areas in the base facility. We have multiple VHF antennas up on a tower, HF broadband antenna. It's a broadband folded dipole, is the standard for HF communications and Civil Air Patrol. Although some of our locations have vertical antennas, most of our communications use the broadband folded dipoles because they are frequency agile for our A.L.E. communications, where the radios will handshake. They'll do sounding across multiple frequencies in the HF spectrum automatically until they negotiate the best link quality. So we need a good broadband antenna, although some of our stations also have auto tuners. This is our tower at Long Island Group headquarters with our VHF antennas. And local missions and comm support. Some examples of some of the major activities that we've supported in recent years, starting off with the COVID-19 response. For at least the past 8 months, we have been supporting Long Island based food pantries, where we'll do packing and distribution of food for families impacted by COVID. I think we've already gone past the thousands of man hours point in terms of the assistance that we've provided at a local level, but nationwide, CAP's COVID response is actually the largest mission in terms of manpower and equipment since World War II. So not only working at food pantries, but also transporting of critical supplies around the country and other logistical support activities that we get involved in. For example, down in the Philadelphia area, we have CAP volunteers doing crowd control at the local arena or convention center where they're giving out the COVID inoculations. And these are all volunteers. Long Island Group was very involved with the response to both Hurricane Sandy and Irene, doing aerial photo reconnaissance of beach erosion and damage to buildings throughout the New York metro area, as well as critical infrastructure. The low-level photography was in support of FEMA mission requirements across the state. Our ground teams also assisted at shelter facilities, and we operated our emergency communications networks to support all these air and ground activities. On an ongoing basis, as tasked by the Air Force, we will go out and respond to emergency locator transmitter or PLB or EPIRB signals that occur across the New York metropolitan area, not just on Long Island. In fact, we've even worked outside of Long Island in Connecticut, upstate New York, New Jersey, in partnership with the Connecticut and New Jersey wings. So all of our assets are shared across the region to respond to an emergency situation. On 9/11, a Long Island Group aircraft actually was the first aircraft in the air the next day, as authorized by FEMA and the New York State Governor's Office to take pictures of Ground Zero. We actually have a piece of the World Trade Center steel that was given to us for a memorial that's set up at the Long Island Group headquarters at MacArthur Airport. Every year we support the Memorial Day Air Show at Jones Beach State Park, which is a gigantic event. 300,000 or 400,000 people attend. We support both the Air Force and the Navy, as well as all the civilian participants in the air show, by providing flight line safety and security staff, perimeter guard locations in conjunction, of course, with local law enforcement and airport personnel, and all sorts of logistical support. This year, we're actually doing a flyby for the air show at the beach. So anyone that'll be there, be on the lookout for our aircraft. This is Memorial Day weekend. And some of the other examples of community service activities also supported by CAP Comms are those that you see here. Many, many different parades and community fairs where we have our ground teams out doing traffic control, looking for people in distress, for suspicious activity and more. Aviation career days. We do a Pearl Harbor Memorial every year at Republic Airport in Long Island. Many, many different types of activities. Another major activity that we participate in on an annual basis for, I guess, the past 10 years is an American Cancer Society fundraising event that takes place again at Jones Beach State Park in Long Island. This typically draws over 50,000 people. And each year, the Civil Air Patrol conducts emergency services training activities the day before, and then has an overnight bivouac at the site of this fundraising event, which is a walkathon. We provide safety and security patrols during the actual event with our teams walking the boardwalk, and we deploy a command and control communications trailer to support those activities. Now, this event is also very, very well supported by the amateur radio community, and we in fact have a liaison officer every year that works with us to coordinate the activities, to do joint communications planning for the frequencies that both organizations will use, and to define their complementary roles in supporting this activity. So here you see some pictures of this, the American Cancer Society event. So this is our communications trailer. And again, cadets taking part in these activities, doing actual operational communications, mentored by our senior members. We also conduct other field training activities, as I mentioned. So we have different field-based training classes that are taking place. One of the things that I do every year is teach the cadets how to site a good antenna location, and then to erect or dismantle a portable VHF antenna. And then here you can see the group, as well as on the right-hand side, the gentleman in the center, Bob Long, is the communications liaison to the amateur radio community and RACES in the Long Island area, one of them. So just to wrap this up again, the Civil Air Patrol is an integral component of what's called the Air Force Total Force, which consists of the active duty personnel, the reserve, the National Guard, and ourselves. We do joint mission planning and activities for Homeland Security and disaster response and search and rescue. And all of this, of course, is volunteer activities that take place on a daily basis. Any additional questions?
Yeah, this is Bill Kelly, NB1LL. I'm also a Red Cross volunteer. And during Sandy, FEMA received your aerial photography. And through the Red Cross, I was at ground team checking out damage that you had found from the air. So that was very helpful.
That's great. And you know what? A lot of our emergency disaster response activities are done in collaboration with or partnership with other emergency services organizations like the Red Cross, where we'll each have our own role and do a sort of a joint team approach. That's also something we do with, for example, local ambulance companies or fire departments, where we'll do a joint training exercise where maybe a CAP ground team will go out into the woods and find a simulated crash site with simulated victims, and then we'll bring them out of the woods along with the EMS, or EMTs from local fire department, and simulate the entire end-to-end activity with interagency management and communications.
Well, what was good about the photography was that most people think it's finding damage, but it told us where there was no damage, so we didn't have to go look there.
Yep,
so that was very, very helpful.
Yep.
So thank you.
Well, you're welcome. And when we do those photography flights, a lot of times we're using handheld cameras. The airborne photographers will be just pointing the camera out the window of the airplane, but they get specialized training on how to do that and how to do continuous photography over intervals of time. So that, let's say if they're flying along the beach and they want to see like damage or no damage to the beach, every 10 seconds or whatever the interval is, they'll take a picture, and then we stitch everything together when we send that data up to FEMA or the State Emergency Management Office. So they get kind of like a continuous view of the entire disaster site. Any other questions?
Yeah, I got a couple.
Go ahead, Gordon.
Two-part question. One is you mentioned the folded HF dipole. By any chance, it's like maybe a Tenedyne TD, or SS90?
Not that one. Many times it's a B&W.
Oh, you used the B&W. Okay, that's fine. And my other question was regarding the roles and such. So, how do you work the notion of, I noticed you had evaluators on your events, and that's a good thing. But how does that play into the training, things like task books and other things? And how is it different than, let's say, even your planning P type stuff? Is it different than that of the Coast Guard, which is known for deviations, and also Cal Fire? So I'm just kind of curious as to how much is homegrown and how much is generic.
So from a standpoint of risk management, we're using the standard risk management methodology, risk mitigation methodology that other FEMA agencies would use, or the Coast Guard Auxiliary, for example, or the Coast Guard themselves. From the standpoint of the operational planning and response, like creating a communications plan, that's also a lot of FEMA-based doctrine in terms of creating the communications plan. A lot of our communicators actually, to get an emergency services rating for any specialty is a requirement to take at least 2 and usually 4 or 5 FEMA courses, like IS 100, 200, 300, 400, 700, and 800. All of those are required to be a communications unit leader in Civil Air Patrol.
As they should be.
Yes. So we start off with that base of the FEMA ICS courses, depending upon your job role. In the supervisory roles, like the branch directors or the incident commander, obviously you need higher level of training. And then we have our additional operational procedures training. And then we have the technical training on how to do communications in an emergency services scenario. And a lot of that will be based on Air Force guidelines from their standards documents. And it's put into task guides that we've created for each job specialty, including the communications unit leader and mission radio operator. So to get a rating like a mission radio operator, you have to satisfactorily perform each of the tasks or be questioned on the knowledge associated with those tasks by a skills evaluator. And then you're signed off on each of the tasks. And then you have to participate as a trainee in a minimum of 2 missions in order to get that rating. And then every 2 years, you need to renew your rating. So that's, guaranteeing that you stay fresh and current with the new operational procedures and regulations.
Good, thank you.
Sure. Any other questions?
To RBJ. I was curious how many of your cadets, the youth, are coming in with amateur radio licenses, and how many are getting interested in acquiring an amateur radio license after training and mission simulations?
Well, I don't have specific statistics at any level to give you, but I can tell you that the cadets that express an interest in learning about CAP communications, we try to let them know about amateur radio and get them interested in that as well. And some of them, as well as the senior members, have gone on to get their amateur radio licenses. There's been some past discussions about starting an amateur radio club at our base at MacArthur Airport. But one of the challenges we have is putting up antennas because we're right on the airport grounds. In fact, our flight line is on the air side, right? So I think we might have a problem getting approval to put up non-military antennas, but you never know. We could certainly do the license classes. That's something that's possible, or operate a handheld radio or mobile. We'd love to see people get more involved in ham radio as a side result of working in CAP communications.
Yep, so do we.
Any other questions?
W2NZ here.
Yes.
Colonel, considering the demographics of the audience, probably 55 plus, where do we fit in? And in addition, for training, how much training do we need in terms of dedicated hours? Over how long a period does it take place? Is there a vetting period of Beavis types? People can be mediocre, there's no doubt about that. What would happen with them? Of course, for the consummate worker, promotions. How does that happen? How does it facilitate? An individual joins at one particular specialty. Is there the capability to cross over? Looks more interesting. So how would that be handled within the organization? Over to you, sir.
Okay, a lot of questions there, all good ones. So let's try to start from the top. So first of all, there's no age limit, upper age limit for being a Civil Air Patrol member. We have an active member, a colonel, who is, I believe, north of 90 years old and still attends meetings and was one of the original CAP members from World War II in this local area. But there are many, many members of the organization that are in the age range of certainly like 50s through 70s. And Civil Air Patrol does not have an upper age limit for membership to join. There is a minimum age for cadets to join, and there's a maximum age for cadets to join, after which time they have to become a senior member as opposed to being a cadet. So, if you have teenagers that are interested in joining Civil Air Patrol, the initial age is 16, and they can go through age 21, and then they become senior members, or they can join up to age 18 initially. So that's the cadet program, but the senior members would be that you would join and stay as long as you wanted to. Now, the questions about job specialties. If you want to, you can have more than one job specialty, and you can also switch to a different job specialty if something's not your cup of tea. You just, talk to your unit commander, your professional development officer, and get yourself onto a different track. For example, I actually have several different job specialties. Not only do I do communications, I also have a senior rating in public affairs for many, many years. I'm a mission rated pilot, observer, scanner, and I'm almost an aerial photographer. So you can do definitely a lot of different things in the program if you have the time. To answer your next question, the more things you do and the more active you are, the more time it's going to require. As you move through the ranks and you get progressively higher levels of responsibility in operational planning, management, and education of the other members, it will obviously result in you spending more time with Civil Air Patrol, but it's all volunteer. So as long as you don't overtask yourself and you're realistic about what you can accomplish and how much time you want to devote, then we'll sort of design the program accordingly to meet your available time. For the last question around how do you progress through the program, it's a combination of things. So once you get on a job track specialty or more than one, as you progress through the knowledge levels of technician, senior, and master rating in a specialty area, that's one of the criteria for promotion. Another would be on-the-job experience and the demonstrated performance that you've shown to your commanding officer and professional development officer. In other words, I have a job specialty. How active am I? What have I accomplished? What's my plan? Like what you'd have in a civilian job where you have annual performance rating or some sort of a 360 type review. Same kind of thing in CAP. And then time and grade. So that means that there are some minimum requirements for the amount of time you have in each rank before or grade, as the officer is called a grade when you increase. There's some minimum times to jump from one to the next to ensure you have sufficient experience and also that you've taken the training required to go from one stage to another. Part of the training involves online testing, knowledge testing on the different technical topics related to your job specialty. And part of it is the on-the-job training and certification, signed off by a skills evaluator. The grades and ranks are based exactly on the Air Force and the military. So both the cadets and the senior members have non-commissioned and commissioned officer ranks and grades respectively. For the senior members, which are adults, you would come in as what's called a senior member, which is like, a member in training. That's your initial status until you go through the onboarding training. And then you would jump to second lieutenant, first lieutenant, captain, major, lieutenant colonel. Colonel, a full colonel, is usually reserved for wing commander or higher, and then on up from there to general grade. For members that have prior military experience, you can also get non-commissioned officer ranks as a senior member. Like sergeant, master sergeant, etc.
So the initial training, quote, basic training, we know by definition what that would be within the military services.
There's no way basic training. Like you don't have to go to basic training at a military base for 90 days or anything like that. There's no mandatory annual training requirement. The typical member at the local unit level will attend a weekly meeting, which usually lasts about 3 hours, 3-4 hours, where a combination of activities take place, training, guest speakers. You could join a cadet squadron as a senior member and provide training and mentoring to the cadets. and work with them in joint activities. We could join a senior squadron, which is only adult members and typically focused on the emergency services and homeland security missions, or you can join a composite squadron, which has a combination of equal numbers of seniors and cadets. That's usually how people will start at the squadron level. And then they'll work their way up to the group level, which is at the county level, the wing level and beyond. And some people hold jobs at multiple levels like I do, working at the state level as the wing director of communications and also the deputy commander of Long Island Group. So you can dedicate as much time as you want to, but no requirement to be away from home. It's all local training activities unless you want to. If you want to, you can go as a volunteer and take part in national, regional, or statewide training activities on an annual basis.
Okay. All right. Thank you very
Okay.
much. Appreciate it.
Sure. Yes.
Wait, yeah, are the training and task requirements for various roles available online for folks to read so they know what they're getting into? The slides be available as well?
Yes.
Okay,
So don't worry about furiously copying these links down, but in the presentation you've got here, this is about our National Communications Program. This is a link to the Long Island Group website with our communications program overview. And then here I have CAP membership information for adult members. There's another link on the national website under the category of join for cadet members, as well as for parents of cadets with FAQs about what it's all about and what's involved in getting started. We have a local unit finder where you plug in your zip code and it will give you all the contact information and the weekly meeting times and locations for your local squadrons and who to call. So everybody that's in New Jersey, you want to go here, and that will tell you exactly where your local squadron is. Go ahead.
And Jim just mentioned, W2JC just mentions that we'll also put the presentation up into the files area of our group section. So again, if you're a member, okay, you can find it very, very quickly. And if you need it, if you're an outsider, drop me a note at WX2R at ARL.net, and I can get that to you. WX2R at ARL. Okay, back to you, Wayne.
Okay, so the last link here is contact us. This is a Google form. And on this page that gets to the Google form is basic membership eligibility information for cadets and senior members. So there are some requirements around membership. You'll see them here. And then if you click on the link on this page, on the join page, there is a form to contact us for additional information, or if you'd like to join, we can point you to a local unit. There's also a notes field on that form, a comments field, and I would really appreciate that if you do contact us to put in there that you found out about the Civil Air Patrol from this presentation and also what you thought of it. So that's my presentation for tonight. I'll hang around for a few more minutes if anyone else has any questions or comments.
Wayne, I can't thank you enough. And I know from my standpoint is that I liked it a lot, okay, and got a lot out of it. So, and I hope everybody else did here tonight too.